July 1st, 1097. First clash between the Turkish warriors and the European knights. At the end of the 11th century, the East trembled in fear. The Seljuk Turks swept across Anatolia. Swift cavalry, relentless archers. They crushed the Byzantine army at Manzikert in 1071 and established their capital at Nicaea, only a few days' march from Constantinople. The shadow of their warriors loomed over the ancient empire. In the west, feudal Europe knew no peace. Lords clashed without end, knights who lived only for war, an entire continent hardened by violence. Since the fall of Rome, the Franks had gathered under the banner of Christ. But the shock was greater still. The roads of pilgrimage to Jerusalem were now blocked. The Seljuks had shattered the Arab world and seized Palestine. Western Christians felt betrayed, cut off from the tomb of Christ. A mistake. Vengeance was coming. In the imperial palace of Constantinople, Emperor Alexios Komnenos watched his empire shrink each year. His armies no longer sufficed. His walls would not hold forever. And so, in a desperate gesture, he reached out to the west. Come and save us. An appeal that would unleash the First Crusade and plunge the East into fire and blood. They came from far away, from the frozen steppes of Central Asia. A people of horsemen, forged in dust and blood. The Seljuks rose in the flames of war. First against other Turkic tribes, then against the Persians, and finally against the East itself. In 1055, they entered Baghdad in triumph and placed the Abbasid Caliph under their rule. In 1071, at Manzikert, they crushed the Byzantine army and opened the gates of Anatolia. Each victory brought more land, more plunder, more glory. From this legacy of conquest emerged Kilij Arslan I. The young Sultan of Rum did not inherit his throne without struggle. Son of Suleiman ibn Kutulmish, he grew up in a world of betrayal and civil war. He saw his father defeated, his people scattered, his authority challenged. But he survived. Through patience, alliances, and rivers of blood, he rose to master Anatolia. His capital, Nicaea. His ambition to defy Byzantium and crush anyone who dared set foot on his lands. Barely 20 years old, Kilij Arslan was already a feared commander. And to him, the Crusaders from the west were nothing but lost barbarians. Easy prey. Meanwhile, Europe, a continent that had never known peace. Since the fall of Rome, kingdoms rose and fell, alliances broke, wars erupted without end. Franks, Normans, Saxons, each fought to survive, to expand, to dominate. Feudalism reigned supreme. Lords and vassals fought for castles, for fields, sometimes for nothing more than wounded honor. The Franks, crossing the Rhine, established themselves in Gaul and founded the kingdom that bore their name. These men were born for war. Even the Roman papacy struggled to restrain them. It invented the peace of God, forbidding men to fight on Sundays. But this violence, until then turned inward, was about to be unleashed outward. Christendom was preparing to rise, not against itself, but against a common enemy, the Muslim world. By the 11th century, the Seljuks were no mere conquerors. They were living legends. Everywhere, they were considered the most powerful warriors on earth. Their cavalry, swift, elusive. Their mounted archers, struck from afar, harassed, encircled, then vanished before they could be caught. Their discipline and mobility made them nearly unbeatable. In 1055, they entered Baghdad. The Abbasid Caliph, spiritual head of Islam, fell under their control. From then on, they held the heart of the Muslim world. But their expansion did not stop there. To the west, they clashed with the Byzantine Empire, the heir of Rome. A 1,000-year-old civilization, proud, convinced of its superiority. In 1071, at Manzikert, the Seljuks shattered that illusion. They crushed the imperial army of Romanos IV Diogenes. A devastating victory that opened all Anatolia to the Turks. Byzantium reeled. City after city fell. At Nicaea, at Iconium, their banners rose. In the years that followed, the empire was reduced to defending Constantinople itself. And everywhere, people whispered, the Seljuks could not be stopped. In 1095, at Clermont, a vast crowd gathered. At its center, Pope Urban II. His voice thundered like a storm. He spoke of Jerusalem, the holy city defiled. He spoke of pilgrims, humiliated, robbed and slain along the roads. And he promised forgiveness of sins to all who took the cross. The West erupted, but more importantly, the greatest princes of Christendom answered the call. Godfrey of Bouillon, Duke of Lower Lorraine. Austere, devout, respected. He would become the very symbol of the Crusader knight. Raymond of Saint-Gilles, Count of Toulouse. A hardened veteran, over 50 years old. He had fought in Spain against the Muslims of Al-Andalus. His long experience gave him immense authority. And above all, Bohemond of Taranto, a Norman of Sicily, son of the fearsome Robert Guiscard. He had already waged war against Byzantium, ravaging its provinces, defying its armies. Once, he dreamed of seizing Constantinople. And now, irony of fate, he marched east not to destroy Byzantium, but to save it. At their side marched Bishop Adhemar of Le Puy, chosen by the Pope as spiritual leader of the Crusade. Together, they swore to march east to liberate Jerusalem. In 1096, the first wave of Crusaders reached the east, a mass of peasants and petty lords led by Peter the Hermit. But the so-called People's Crusade was a disaster. Disorganized, undisciplined, it was annihilated by Kilij Arslan in Anatolia. A bloody warning, only true princes could carry out this war. Months later, the main army arrived. The great leaders of the Crusade reached Constantinople. There they met Emperor Alexios Komnenos. Anna Komnena wrote,
"A countless multitude of men arrived from the west. It was as if all of Europe had risen, crossing seas and mountains. They advanced in order, like human torrents, their weapons gleaming, their banners streaming in the wind. The emperor and the whole city watched in amazement. Never had such an army approached Constantinople."
But the welcome was cold. Alexios did not see saviors. He saw dangerous rivals. He forced them to swear an oath. All lands taken from the Turks must be returned to Byzantium. Some accepted reluctantly, but others, like Bohemond, clenched their jaws. He had already fought Byzantium with his father, and now he had to swear loyalty to the man he once sought to overthrow. The Crusaders crossed the Bosporus. Under the burning Anatolian sun, they marched, and soon they would face Kilij Arslan again. This time, near a small town called Dorylaeum. July 1st, 1097. The Crusader vanguard, led by Bohemond of Taranto and Robert of Normandy, encamped near Dorylaeum. They expected rest. Instead, at dawn, the horizon roared. Scouts arrived too late. Kilij Arslan was coming. He brought the Danish men and the cavalry of Anatolian emirs. An immense host, almost entirely light horsemen. The Turks descended like a flood. They did not strike head-on. They encircled. Mounted archers rode in swift circles around the Crusader camp. The sky darkened with arrows. Each horseman loosed his bow while retreating, feigned flight, then returned to strike another flank. A deadly dance. The Crusaders were trapped. Their armor shielded them, but turned them into immobile targets. Their heavy war horses, bred for frontal charges, were vulnerable to these elusive riders. The camp erupted in flames. Tents burned, wagons collapsed. Amid the chaos, even the women fought to keep men alive. Some carried water to the fighters. Others gathered fallen arrows and handed them back to Frankish archers. The Turks pressed harder. They struck the flanks, then retreated, never giving the Crusaders a chance for close combat. Kilij Arslan was confident he would annihilate the vanguard before the rest of the army arrived. But Bohemond and Robert held firm. They drew their knights together, formed a wall of shields and spears. Every assault was beaten back, though at heavy cost. Hours passed. Under the Anatolian sun, the Crusader vanguard bled, but did not break. Everything now depended on one thing, that the reinforcements arrived before total annihilation. At last, reinforcements appeared. It was the main Crusader army. At the front, Godfrey of Bouillon. Beside him, Raymond of Saint-Gilles. Adhemar of Le Puy raised the cross high. Stephen of Blois, Robert of Flanders, and their knights followed close. The Crusaders advanced in formation, heavy cavalry in front, infantry behind. The march, steady, disciplined. Then came the order to charge. The knights lowered their lances under the arm, the point leveled forward. The perfected Norman technique. A mounted knight weighed about 110 kilos, with his mail armor, shield, and weapons. His warhorse added more than 500 kilos. Together, they hurled over 600 kilos of mass at 30 kilometers per hour. In modern terms, nearly 20,000 joules of kinetic energy. The impact was the equivalent of a battering ram crashing forward, focused on the tip of a steel lance. The collision was devastating. The swift but lightly armored Turkish cavalry could not withstand the blow. Their lines shattered. Confusion spread everywhere. For the first time, Kilij Arslan's army fell back. What was meant to be a crushing victory turned into disaster. The initiative passed to the Crusaders. The Turkish cavalry was caught between hammer and anvil. Their arrows no longer sufficed. Their speed, once their advantage, was useless against the brutal shock of heavy cavalry. The Crusaders broke through. Lances pierced, swords fell. Turks died by the hundreds. The enemy camp was seized. Tents were plundered. Treasures looted. The families that had followed the army were taken captive. Kilij Arslan fled the battlefield. He abandoned his allies, his wealth, his honor. For him, it was total humiliation. For the Crusaders, it was more than a victory. It was proof. In a single day, they had destroyed what the East had called the most feared warriors in the world. At Dorylaeum, on July 1st, 1097, the myth of Seljuk invincibility collapsed. Ibn al-Athir, the chronicler of Mosul, would write, "The Turks attacked the Franks at Dorylaeum, and at first, they were close to annihilating them. But soon, other divisions of their army arrived as reinforcements. The Franks regrouped, charged together, and struck with terrible violence. They slaughtered the Muslims. It was a great defeat for the army of Islam and a great shame for Kilij Arslan. The victory at Dorylaeum was complete. The humiliation, immense. For the Crusaders, it was more than a battle won. It was a statement. They were no longer seen as mere pilgrims with swords, but as a disciplined army, capable of defeating the most feared warriors of the East. In Constantinople, Emperor Alexios Komnenos realized that his Latin allies were a force to be watched as much as supported. In Baghdad, in Aleppo, in Damascus, the news spread. An army from the west had crushed the Turks in Anatolia. The Muslim world looked on with dread at this new enemy that had risen across the sea. The road to Antioch was now open, and beyond it, Jerusalem. Dorylaeum was not the end. It was only the beginning. For Kilij Arslan, the defeat was a scar, a wound that would haunt the memory of the peoples of the East. Raymond of Agulay, chronicler of the Crusade, wrote,
"The Lord showed his strength that day. The enemy was scattered, and the victory we won was greater than anything we could have hoped for.